The camera lights blazed hot against Michael Jackson's face as he sat across from Oprah Winfrey in 1993. Millions watched from their living rooms, expecting another celebrity interview filled with rehearsed answers and polite laughter. What they got instead was a moment that would shatter their perception of the king of pop forever. When Oprah asked about his childhood, Michael's eyes dropped to his hands. His voice, usually strong and confident, became barely more than a whisper. "I never had a childhood," he said, and in those 5 words, he opened a door to a pain so profound that viewers around the world felt their hearts crack. Behind the sequin glove and the moonwalk, behind the record-breaking albums and sold-out stadiums, lived a man who had been robbed of something precious. While other children played tag in their neighborhoods and built forts in their backyards, young Michael stood in recording studios under harsh fluorescent lights. His brothers practiced dance moves until their feet bled. Their father, Joe Jackson, watched with eyes that showed no mercy for mistakes. There were no birthday parties with cake and candles. There were no lazy Saturday mornings watching cartoons. There was only rehearsal, performance, perfection. The world saw a talented child prodigy, but they didn't see the tears he cried into his pillow each night. Michael described looking out the window of his Gary, Indiana home, watching neighborhood kids ride bikes and play games he didn't know the rules to. He pressed his small hands against the glass, feeling the barrier between his world and theirs. Sometimes those children would stop and stare at his house, hoping for a glimpse of the famous Jackson family. They thought he was lucky. They thought he had everything. They couldn't hear his father's voice through the walls, demanding one more take, one more hour, one more sacrifice. They couldn't see the childhood being burned away like morning mist under a scorching sun. The Jackson 5 became a sensation when Michael was just 11 years old. Their songs dominated the radio. Their faces appeared on magazine covers. Ed Sullivan invited them to his show. Dick Clark featured them on American Bandstand. Every performance was flawless, every note hit perfectly, every dance step synchronized. The public saw polish and professionalism. They didn't see the hours of brutal rehearsals that created it. They didn't see Joe Jackson's belt when someone made a mistake. They didn't see the fear in young Michael's eyes when he forgot a lyric or stumbled during a spin. Other kids Michael's age worried about homework and baseball games. Michael worried about hitting the high notes and pleasing audiences of thousands. Other kids fought with their siblings over toys and television channels. Michael fought exhaustion and the constant pressure to be perfect. His voice became the voice of Motown's future. His talent became the family's meal ticket. The weight of responsibility crushed down on shoulders far too small to carry it. While his classmates learned multiplication tables, Michael learned that love in his family came with conditions. You were valued for what you could do, not for who you were. The studio became his prison, though everyone else called it his destiny. Recording equipment surrounded him like the bars of a cage. Producers praised his gift while stealing his youth. His father pushed harder, always harder, because success demanded sacrifice. Michael gave everything he had. He poured his soul into every song, his energy into every performance. What he received in return was fame, fortune, and an emptiness that no amount of applause could fill. The boy in the mirror wasn't smiling. The boy in the mirror was disappearing, replaced by an image carefully crafted for public consumption. Somewhere beneath the surface, the real Michael Jackson was still pressing his hands against the glass, still watching other children play, still wondering what it felt like to simply be a kid with nothing to prove and no one to please. The secret he carried wasn't just about missing birthday parties or baseball games. It was about losing himself before he ever had the chance to discover who he might have been. The Motown days demanded everything from the Jackson brothers, but they took the most from Michael. Berry Gordy saw something special in the youngest performer, a spark that couldn't be taught or manufactured. That recognition became both blessing and curse. Michael received extra attention from producers and choreographers. He got lead vocals on their biggest hits. He became the face of the group. The spotlight found him naturally, but it also trapped him. Every achievement raised the bar higher. Every success created new expectations. The pressure built like water behind a dam, and Michael was just a child trying to hold it all back with his bare hands. His brothers experienced their own struggles, their own sacrifices, but Michael's burden was unique. When Diana Ross took him under her wing, people thought it was mentorship. What Michael needed was a mother figure, someone to tell him it was okay to rest, okay to play, okay to make mistakes. Instead, he found another person invested in his star power. Everyone wanted a piece of Michael Jackson's talent. Nobody asked what Michael Jackson the boy needed. The recording sessions stretched late into the night. School became something he squeezed in between performances. His teacher came to him rather than him going to school, sitting in hotel rooms and tour buses, trying to provide an education while his real education happened on stages across America. Joe Jackson's methods became legendary in all the wrong ways. He believed that talent without discipline meant nothing. He believed that fear motivated better than encouragement. The stories that later emerged painted a picture of a man who confused abuse with ambition. Michael spoke carefully about his father in interviews, choosing words that acknowledged the success while hinting at the cost. He mentioned the belt. He mentioned the fear. He mentioned being so afraid of making mistakes that he would throw up before performances. The physical scars healed. The emotional ones ran so deep that fame and fortune couldn't touch them. The other Jackson brothers dealt with Joe's harsh discipline, but Michael bore something additional. He was different from his brothers in ways that made him vulnerable. His voice was softer, his nature more sensitive. He cried more easily. He felt things more deeply. Joe saw this sensitivity as weakness to be beaten out of him. What Joe couldn't understand was that this very sensitivity made Michael's performances so powerful. When Michael sang about longing or pain, audiences believed him because he was drawing from a well of genuine emotion. Every song became a confession. Every performance was therapy he didn't know he was giving himself. Fame isolated Michael even from his own siblings. They were all in the Jackson 5, but Michael was the star. That distinction created distance. His brothers might resent the attention he received. They might feel jealous of the solo opportunities that came his way. Michael felt guilty for his success, as if his talent had somehow stolen something from them. The family dynamic twisted into something unhealthy. Love became transactional. Affection was earned through achievement. Failure meant disappointment, and disappointing Joe Jackson meant facing consequences that left marks not everyone could see. The white glove Michael later made famous became more than a fashion statement. It was armor. The elaborate costumes and makeup weren't just performance art. They were masks. If he couldn't be himself, he would create someone else to be, someone who could handle the pressure and the pain. Michael Jackson the performer could do anything. Michael Jackson the boy was still trapped inside, still looking out windows, still wondering what normal felt like. The public loved the performer. They bought his records by the millions. They screamed his name at concerts. They made him one of the most famous people on earth. None of that love could heal what had been broken. Motown celebrated the Jackson 5's achievements with awards and accolades. The family moved from Gary to California, from a small house to a mansion. The trappings of success surrounded them, but Michael found no comfort in luxury. He walked through rooms filled with gold records and expensive furniture, feeling more alone than ever. Money couldn't buy back the afternoons he lost to rehearsal. Fame couldn't give him friends who liked him for himself rather than his celebrity. The pool in the backyard reflected his image, but he barely recognized the face staring back. That face belonged to Michael Jackson, child star. The real boy had been buried so deep under expectations and demands that even he was starting to forget what remained underneath. As Michael transitioned from child star to adult artist, the fractures in his foundation began to show. The Jackson 5 became the Jacksons. Michael's voice deepened, his talent matured, but the wounds from his stolen childhood only grew more painful. He couldn't go back and reclaim those lost years. He couldn't undo the fear his father had instilled. He couldn't erase the memories of rehearsing until his body gave out or performing when he was sick because the show must always go on. Instead, he did what many damaged people do. He built walls. He constructed an elaborate fantasy world where he could control everything, where he could finally experience the wonder and joy that childhood should have held. Neverland Ranch became that world. Michael purchased the property in 1988 and transformed it into something between an amusement park and a sanctuary. Ferris wheels spun against the California sky. Carnival rides sparkled with lights. A movie theater showed films around the clock. A zoo housed exotic animals from around the world. To outsiders, it looked eccentric, perhaps even disturbing. Why would a grown man build an amusement park for himself? But Neverland wasn't about eccentricity. It was about healing. Every ride represented the normal childhood experiences Michael had missed. Every game was a chance to reclaim stolen innocence. Walking through Neverland's gates was like stepping backward through time to a place where performance wasn't required and perfection wasn't demanded. Michael invited children to Neverland, which later became controversial and was used against him in terrible ways. But his motivation came from a genuine place. He wanted to give other kids the magical experiences he'd been denied. He wanted to see their faces light up with pure joy, untainted by adult expectations or pressure. When children played at Neverland, Michael watched them with an expression that was both happy and heartbroken. He was living vicariously through their laughter, trying to fill the void inside himself with their innocent delight. The tragedy was that no amount of watching others experience childhood could give him his own back. His changing appearance became tabloid fodder. Magazines published side-by-side photos showing how his face had transformed over the years. Commentators speculated about plastic surgery, skin conditions, and psychological issues. What they failed to understand was that Michael was literally trying to reconstruct himself. He couldn't go back and change his past, but he could change his reflection. Every surgical procedure was an attempt to create distance between who he had been forced to become and who he wished he could be. The face Joe Jackson had criticized, the face that reminded him of his painful youth, gradually disappeared. In its place emerged something otherworldly, neither entirely masculine nor feminine, neither clearly black nor white. Michael was trying to become universal, transcendent, free from the categories and expectations that had caged him. His music during this period reflected his internal struggle. Thriller made him the biggest star on the planet, but songs like Billie Jean and Wanna Be Starting Something revealed his paranoia and pain. Man in the Mirror was a direct plea for change and healing. The lyrics weren't subtle. Michael was asking himself and the world to look deeper, to see beyond the surface. When he sang about making a change, he wasn't being metaphorical. He was literally trying to change himself from the inside out, trying to become someone who could finally be at peace. The public's relationship with Michael grew complicated. They loved his music but mocked his eccentricities. They celebrated his talent but questioned his sanity. Late-night talk shows made him the butt of jokes. Comedians imitated his soft-speaking voice and his strange mannerisms. What they were really mocking was trauma. They were laughing at a man whose childhood had been stolen, who was desperately trying to find healing in whatever ways he could imagine. The more the world mocked him, the more he retreated into his fantasy world. Neverland's gates closed tighter. His public appearances became rarer. The mask he wore became harder to remove because he could no longer remember what existed underneath. During the Oprah interview, when Michael finally spoke openly about his lost childhood, viewers saw glimpses of the real person behind the persona. His pain was palpable. His loneliness was evident. He described crying from loneliness even though he was surrounded by people. He talked about looking for anyone who might understand what he'd experienced. That interview should have been a turning point, a moment when the world rallied around a wounded person and offered compassion. Instead, skepticism followed. People questioned whether he was telling the truth. They wondered if it was a publicity stunt. They couldn't comprehend that someone so famous, so wealthy, so talented could be so fundamentally broken inside. Michael retreated again, having offered his truth only to have it questioned and dismissed. The tragedy of Michael Jackson's life wasn't just about what happened to him as a child. It was about how the world responded when he tried to heal. Every coping mechanism he developed, every attempt to reclaim what had been stolen, was twisted into evidence of his strangeness. When he spoke in a soft, childlike voice, people assumed he was being fake. What they didn't understand was that this voice felt safer to him than the commanding performer voice he'd been forced to develop as a child. When he covered his children's faces in public, people called it bizarre. What they didn't see was a father desperately trying to give his kids the privacy and normal childhood he'd never experienced. The allegations that emerged in 1993 nearly destroyed him. A child accused Michael of inappropriate behavior, and suddenly everything about him became sinister in the public eye. His love for children was reframed as predatory. Neverland went from eccentric sanctuary to alleged crime scene in the public imagination. Michael maintained his innocence, and the case was eventually settled out of court, but the damage to his reputation was catastrophic. What hurt most wasn't just the accusation itself but how quickly the world believed the worst about him. He had spent his entire life entertaining people, bringing joy through his music and performances. In return, they were ready to see him as a monster based on allegations that were never proven in court. The truth about Michael's relationships with children was far more complex and sadder than tabloid headlines suggested. He genuinely connected with kids because he felt like one of them. They hadn't been corrupted by fame or jealousy. They didn't want anything from him except to play and have fun. When Michael was around children, he could temporarily forget the pain of his own stolen youth. He could laugh without calculation. He could be silly without worrying about his image. These relationships were innocent attempts at healing, but in a world that had grown cynical about celebrity behavior, innocence itself became suspicious. His family relationships deteriorated as he aged. Michael's success had overshadowed his siblings' careers, creating resentment. His father remained a complicated figure, someone Michael could neither fully forgive nor completely cut from his life. Joe Jackson appeared at Michael's events, basking in reflected glory while seemingly unable to acknowledge the damage he'd caused. Michael spoke about his father with a mixture of respect for the career opportunities he'd created and pain over the childhood he'd destroyed. That contradiction never resolved. How do you thank someone for your success while also holding them accountable for your trauma? The 2005 trial was perhaps the most painful public ordeal Michael endured. Accused again of crimes against children, he faced a criminal trial that played out like a media circus. Every day, cameras captured him arriving at court, his health visibly declining under the stress. The prosecution painted him as a predator who used his wealth and fame to manipulate vulnerable children. The defense presented evidence of extortion attempts and false accusations motivated by money. After months of testimony, the jury acquitted Michael on all charges. He was found not guilty, but in the court of public opinion, doubt lingered. Michael's defenders pointed to the pattern of accusers seeking financial settlements. They noted that multiple investigations over the years had found no evidence supporting the allegations. His critics argued that wealth and fame had protected him from justice. The truth likely lay in a sadder place than either narrative suggested. Michael was a deeply damaged person whose attempts to heal himself looked strange to a world that couldn't understand his pain. His behavior around children, while innocent in intent, crossed boundaries that made people uncomfortable. He never developed the social awareness to recognize how his actions appeared to others because his own childhood had never taught him normal boundaries. The world wanted Michael Jackson to be either a saint or a monster because those narratives were simple. The reality was that he was a profoundly wounded human being who never received the help he needed. Therapy might have helped him process his trauma. Proper support might have taught him healthier coping mechanisms. Instead, he had yes men and enablers who fed his fantasies rather than challenging him to grow. He had doctors willing to prescribe dangerous medications. He had business managers concerned more with profit than his well-being. The machine that had created the child star continued consuming the adult artist, grinding him down piece by piece. When Michael spoke about his childhood secret during the Oprah interview, he offered the world a key to understanding everything that followed. His strange behavior, his plastic surgery, his elaborate fantasy world, his childlike manner, all of it traced back to those stolen years in Gary and the brutal training that made him a star. The world was given a chance to respond with compassion. Instead, it responded with judgment and mockery, proving once again that fame doesn't protect you from loneliness. It just means you suffer in front of a larger audience. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, at age 50. The news sent shockwaves around the globe. Fans gathered at Neverland's gates, leaving flowers and singing his songs. Television networks interrupted regular programming to announce his death. Social media, still relatively new, exploded with tributes and grief. The whole world mourned the king of pop, but what they were really mourning was more complex than they realized. They grieved for the music that would never be created. They grieved for their own youth, connected to memories of dancing to Thriller or moonwalking in their living rooms. But perhaps, if they'd understood the full depth of his story, they would have grieved for the childhood that was stolen and the wounded man who never recovered from that theft. The circumstances of Michael's death revealed the extent of his pain. He died from acute propofol intoxication, essentially an anesthetic that should only be administered in medical settings. Michael had been using it to sleep, unable to find rest through normal means. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drug that killed him. But Murray was just the last in a long line of people who enabled Michael's destruction. The pills and potions were symptoms of a deeper disease, the inability to escape the trauma that had shaped his entire existence. In death, Michael's secret finally received the understanding it deserved. Commentators and biographers revisited his interviews with new perspective. The Oprah conversation, once sensational entertainment, became a heartbreaking confession. People began connecting dots they'd previously ignored. The plastic surgery was about escaping his father's face in the mirror. The high voice was a refusal to fully grow into the adulthood that had hurt him so badly. Neverland was a physical manifestation of his inner child crying out for the experiences he'd missed. Every strange behavior had an explanation rooted in childhood trauma. His 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, grew up in the shadow of their father's legend. They faced their own challenges, navigating grief and fame simultaneously. Paris, in particular, spoke openly about her father's love and the pain of losing him. She described a man who was devoted to his children, who wanted desperately to give them the normal childhood he'd never experienced. He kept their faces covered not from shame but from protection. He taught them music and creativity but never pushed them the way Joe had pushed him. Michael broke the cycle of abuse, even though he couldn't fully heal from it himself. The estate Michael left behind was complicated. His assets included the Beatles' publishing catalog, his own music catalog, and various properties. Legal battles erupted over his will and his debts. But his real legacy wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the music that continued to move people, the dance moves that were still imitated, and the conversations his life sparked about the price of childhood fame. Other child stars who followed him, from Justin Bieber to Britney Spears, faced their own struggles, and many people pointed to Michael's story as a cautionary tale about what happens when we consume children's talent without protecting their well-being. Documentaries and books continued examining Michael's life long after his death. Some were sympathetic, painting him as a victim of circumstance and cruelty. Others were sensational, focusing on allegations and controversies. The truth, as always, was complicated. Michael was neither the saint his devoted fans insisted on nor the monster his harshest critics portrayed. He was a person whose childhood was stolen, whose talent was exploited, and whose attempts at healing were misunderstood. He was someone who brought immense joy to billions while carrying immense pain within himself. The broken hearts that Michael mentioned in his revelation about his lost childhood belonged not just to his fans but to everyone who understood, too late, what he'd been trying to tell them all along. Behind the sequins and spotlight was a boy who just wanted to play. Behind the moonwalk and the music videos was a human being who needed compassion and understanding. Behind the king of pop was Michael, just Michael, forever reaching toward a childhood that remained just beyond his grasp. In the years since his death, attitudes toward childhood fame have shifted. Parents think more carefully before pushing their children into entertainment. Child labor laws in the entertainment industry have strengthened. People discuss the cost of early stardom more openly. Michael's story, once seen as uniquely bizarre, is now recognized as an extreme example of a common problem. What happens when we prioritize talent and profit over the well-being of children? His music endures because it was honest. Every note carried real emotion. Every lyric reflected genuine experience. When Michael sang Heal the World, he wasn't being abstract. He was singing about his own desperate need for healing. When he performed Man in the Mirror, he was looking at his own reflection and pleading for change. His art was his therapy, the one place where he could express truths too painful to speak plainly. The secret Michael revealed to Oprah that day wasn't really a secret at all. The evidence had always been visible to anyone willing to look past the fame and fortune. A child performing with the professionalism of a veteran entertainer. A teenager who never rebelled or acted out. An adult who seemed stuck in perpetual youth. The signs were there, but the world was too busy enjoying the show to notice the performer was suffering. When he finally said the words, "I never had a childhood," hearts broke everywhere because people realized they'd been complicit. They'd consumed his talent without questioning the cost. They'd celebrated his success without caring about his pain. Michael Jackson's childhood secret was ultimately a mirror held up to society, reflecting our values and our failures. It asked uncomfortable questions about how we treat talented children, about the price we're willing to let others pay for our entertainment. His broken childhood created transcendent art but destroyed the artist. His pain produced music that made the world dance while he cried alone. Understanding his secret means accepting our role in his tragedy and committing to do better for the children who come after, ensuring that talent is nurtured without stealing innocence, that success is celebrated without sacrificing well-being. That would be the real tribute to the boy who never got to play, the man who never stopped looking for the childhood that was taken from him, and the legend whose story broke hearts everywhere because, finally, people understood.